This summer, I think, is such a wonderful time for us to reach out to members of the society to find out what special gifts and interests they have. And so this summer we heard John Gurney speak, and today we're going to hear member Nicola DeMarco. And wonderful title, Got Peace, which is why I'm wearing this, which you can get from UNICEF. Got peace? Can there be peace without justice, human rights, and mutual respect? So to answer those questions, and probably to raise some more questions as well, is Nicola.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Before we begin, we have a special treat. A guest musician from Ethiopia who lives here in New York, but is born in Ethiopia and has brought authentic Ethiopian music for us to enjoy and to learn and grow from. While he's performing, I handed out a piece which all of you have on your seat. If you didn't get one, there's some extras around. And on the one side is a kind of idea map with the center of it being the nation of Ethiopia and its influences throughout history. And on the reverse side is a little fun quiz. Please do not stress over this. It is meant to be fun. It is meant to be, well, I didn't know that kind of thing. I handed it out to some of you last week and assured you that I would be checking the homework today. That was a lie. And after we enjoy the music from our musician Abai Mengist, we can go over some of the questions and get some give and take from you as to what this is about. And then Marlon and I will discuss further some of the issues regarding peace between Ethiopia and Italy. So if you could please welcome Abai Mengist.
apologize in advance. I got a cold, so I may sound a bit stuffy. My head is heavy, but hopefully you guys can hear me. Second thing is, throughout this conversation, we welcome questions and comments. There's a cordless microphone over there, so at any time, any of you guys have any questions about anything that we're discussing, you're free to raise your hand and you'll be called. All right. So I guess what we should do first is go over the quiz, right?
Yeah.
I hope you guys had a chance to look at it.
No bagels if you got anything.
So
I'll be starving too.
We'll go over it one at a time. Pretty easy quiz. I made a 90. You guys should all pass.
I always found these kinds of quizzes challenging for me, kind of fun, even if it was something I knew very well. So I just want to take a few minutes, and if there are any questions about the information, it's meant to be interactive. So just raise your hand and someone will come to you with the cordless microphone. If you look at this side with the multiple choice on it, the first question is, in 2010, the total population of Africa is about, any guesses?
Anybody? B?
Back here with your hand raised, excuse me. I'm just joking. Yes, it is. In fact, you are right. We get early bagels. Winners. Now this is a misconception. The reason I put this as the first question is one of the misconceptions people generally have is, oh, they're just having babies every day and it's overpopulated and the biggest population growth in the world has got to be Africa. False. The biggest boom in population is South Asia, India, Pakistan, that area, that Bangladesh. That is the biggest population growth in the world. It has been for the past 15 years. Africa, in fact, because of the impact of malaria being the #1 killer, AIDS being the second killer, has, with a normal population growth, has suffered a lot of loss, and therefore the main population is about 1 billion people.
Okay, let's go to question number 2. In the map, the nation of Ethiopia is highlighted. Its western and southern neighbors are, you looking for a hand to be raised? Ken, let's go to Ken. B is right. B is right.
Once again, Ken, very good. You did your
Sudan
homework.
and Kenya.
Now, I'll tell you that, again, strategically, for reasons to stimulate some talk about current events, a lot of people misconceive Darfur as some place in some obscure, well, some people just generalize it as all of Africa. But if we look at the highlighted blue area, just to the left in the western area, the big country just to the west is Sudan. And one portion of Sudan, sadly, is the Darfur region. Most Sudanese live in peace. Yes, it's a tough dictatorship, but in the sense that we can think of Darfur, it's a misconception to think Darfur is all of Sudan, or worse yet, all of Africa. And I think when we try to help people who are suffering, such as in Darfur, it's better to have these parameters so that we can go in with real knowledge that's going to help. And the other part of this question is to see if people understand the geographic boundaries and relationship of Kenya, which of course is the land where our president's family is from, in relation to the historic area of the Rift Valley and here Ethiopia.
Okay, question 3. The total number of languages spoken besides English, French, and Portuguese in Africa is, let's see a hand. The lady in front.
I believe there's 86 different languages.
Well, that's not the answer on the quiz.
A, B, or C, please.
A, B, or C?
Well, I'd have to say over, that's why I said the answer. I just came back from Ethiopia and they told us that there are 86 different languages, different groups that are there.
I'm the only one in the room who can get away with this.
The question is the total number of languages spoken besides English, French, and Portuguese in Africa, in the entire continent.
I'm sorry.
Let's go to Dr. Ruth in the back.
I'd like to suggest that we eliminate dialects and regionalisms from the
Now we're getting into a lot of sophisticated detail, which is great. May I encourage ethical culture debate without bloodshed? And I wanted to just interject for a second, because this is very important. These kind of nuances are critical, and the fact that my colleague, teaching colleague, Dr. Anna Maria, is here today is such an honor. Thank you for coming. And I just recently saw the photographs of her trip to Ethiopia. And in our excitement to read the news and try to stay informed, sometimes we will jump ahead and think, okay, this story is about such and such. And in fact, the details are part of the trick there is not necessarily about Ethiopia, but the continent as a whole. And it goes back to what Dr. Cohen was saying. How do we define language? Well, and not just the division of dialects. But if you took a common person's description of a language, the correct answer is C. Throughout Africa, over 2,000. In fact, with over 30 countries, each country having at least 10 languages, separate languages, not dialects. And of course, my other teaching colleague, who happens to be from Tanzania, is going to correct me in some way. Ms. Lulu?
I just wanted to say, these are three countries in Africa. Oh, it's countries, not countries.
Oh, I think Lulu, I could be wrong, but I think I said over 30 countries.
But in the case of 33, it's a big one.
Thank you.
Difference, right?
This is why Lulu and I are still friends, and you know, I can always learn from Lulu. In fact, very poignantly, one of the reasons why Lulu and I have stayed friends and learned from each other is when my grandfather was a colonist in Ethiopia under Mussolini. So as a poor person, he was tricked into believing there's a future for this kind of colony in Ethiopia. I say tricked because when reality set in and Selassie kicked the Italians out, fortunately for all of us, my grandfather, who I'm named after, was imprisoned in her country, in Tanzania, under the British in a prisoner of war camp. So the nuances of reconciliation take different tones. And one of them is that Lulu and I had a lot to talk about. Her being an elder and telling me about what she knows of that period, and also she can go on and on about Tanzanian history, which is something that we as a society can learn quite a bit about, a society that was focused on egalitarianism since its inception in the 60s. So again, these questions are meant to be a point of discussion. And yes, remember 53 countries in Africa, with at least 10 languages in each, so it has to be C. In Ethiopia alone, I'm not going to embarrass anyone by asking them specifically, but I know there are, as you said, over 80 languages, not dialects, languages spoken throughout the country. And some of the languages in the center and the north have a familial relationship language-wise with Hebrew and Arabic. So you have Amharic, which is a descendant, if you will, of the Semitic languages, and Giz, which came before Amharic, also a descendant of the Semitic family. But in the southern part, you have what we broadly know as what's called Bantu and African languages from other areas of Africa. So some West African people migrated and brought their languages there, and then other people were there. So there's a real diversity that many times in the West, and even among people like ourselves who are trying to focus on human rights and understanding, we just don't get the amount of diversity within each country and within the continent of Africa.
You really have a wealth of knowledge and information, and I sort of want us to try to touch on everything, and I see we only maybe about have 20 or 25 minutes left. So if it's okay, we can bypass the other questions of the quiz just to, so that you can really get into the crux of it.
I have to give the answer.
Who wants the answers?
I won't make it out of here alive.
All right, well, let's go over them. Let's go over them then. Question 4, which of the following originated in Ethiopia? What do you guys think? Joe Marlon. B, correct. Coffee and the Queen of Sheba.
Wait. Correction.
Now she's
I know
gonna say
what her
what I said.
correction
I
is.
bet you she says what I said.
No, she's
All
not.
right, let's see.
I know what her
First of all, for everyone to know, my name is Anna Maria Thomas. I'm an educator in the New York public school system. And I wanted to say that most of you know of Queen of Sheba as the name, but that's the Eurocentric name. Her real name, Ethiopian name, which I found out on my trip, is Queen Makeda. That is the name of this person who everyone is of European or getting the information which is not correctly being told. The name is Queen Makeda. Makeda, which is the way they pronounce it in Ethiopia, not Makeda.
Thank you.
And Anna Maria, you will be happy to know, because of your discussion with me last night at that same point, you'll be very proud of me. I wrote in Makeda. And Anna Maria, again, is one of the most respected educational activists in this country, probably this world. She's traveled to many parts of the world and is getting first-hand insight and sharing it not just with me, but in the public schools. So thank you for that correction.
Thank you. So let's go to question 5. Which of the following religions were practiced in Ethiopia before Europeans arrived in the 19th century? C is the correct answer.
We have to say C to C. Yes.
Yes. Question 6. Okay, we're at the true or false questions now. So true or false, President Obama's father was born near the Rift Valley. True. True.
This is true.
Question 7. The 2010 World Cup took place in South Africa. True or false? True. We should all know that one in here, right? True. Question 8. Most Ethiopians suffer from chronic starvation today. True or false? Correct.
Common stereotype, common myth. It's false.
False is the answer.
The common myth is an image from the 80s where there are fields of people just dying of starvation. Nothing could be further from the truth. Believe it or not, even then, with a country of over 70 million people, 70 million people were not starving. It was a horrible, horrible drought, a horrible death toll from the starvation. And the majority of people were not starving. But today, Ethiopia has turned many, many corners, not so much on human rights, but on production of agriculture, where they're actually exporting food, and their GDP is soaring.
Okay, question 9. Rastafari is the name of an Ethiopian king. True or false?
True.
This is true. And yes, question in the back. Hold on for the mic.
Yeah.
Isn't the better term emperor?
The better term would be emperor, only because I like to, you've asked 2 questions. I think it's, being a history teacher, I could say it's pretty interchangeable, but Ras is the Ethiopian language word for king, and Tafari refers to Haile Selassie. That's his Ethiopian Amharic name, Rastafari. Yeah, we're going to get into more of a discussion of that. Thank you. His Haile Selassie's uncle was Menelik, Emperor Menelik, and one of the greatest things that he accomplished for world history was he helped repel an Italian attempt to colonize Ethiopia in 1896. This was the peak of the European scramble for Africa, which was tragic in many ways because of the enslavement of the African people and, in fact, the mental and moral enslavement of Europe to do this for the next 100 years or so, I should say 80 years. Didn't succeed that long. But Menelik was the emperor of Ethiopia that repelled the Italian aggression in 1896 and became a symbol, the Battle of Adwa became a symbol of pride and rallying for other Africans as the century proceeded, and finally total independence by the 80s, the 1980s.
Okay, last question, number 10. Egypt is an African nation. True or false?
True. Another common misperception, and thank you, Marlon, for keeping track of time, but most people say that's in the Middle East. Also true, but also part of Africa, Morocco, Middle Eastern. Ethnically, culturally, but not geographically. It's Africa. And most Egyptians that you speak to will tell you they're not only African, but proud to be African. Microphone.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I've often thought that Italy is also part of Africa, the same as Egypt.
That's out of my ballpark. You know, like that. Since it's the first time it came to me as a question, I'm gonna pass on that.
Oh.
So they must have been living in Egypt before they got to Israel.
Well, certainly a common myth is that okay, a people who came out of Egypt are non-African. Well, obviously, if you're coming out of Egypt and Egypt is in Africa, logically it's an African people. Now, where that goes over the next 2,000 years, and in the context of the last century, there's a lot of nuances to it, and talk, you know, people take sides where we're talking about the unity of humanity instead of the divisions. Isn't it?
I'm pretty sure that geographically, Israel is part of Asia.
Okay, yeah. When we're talking about, I think what he's referring to is, okay, you have Moses in Egypt, and you have the movement across the Red Sea. So how could it not, you know, the Sinai Desert, all the rest? There's some debate as to the origins of the Hebrew people and, you know, their movement out of Africa. So therefore, it isn't. Excuse me? Exactly. Point well taken. And that should be like the counterpoint that ends the discussion, because we all came out of Africa at some point. Thank you.
We don't teach that in the schools, and that's my concern, is that if we can acknowledge that, and I appreciate your acknowledgement of that, but we need to teach that. That needs to be part of our curriculum, and that's what my aim is to put that in the school so that everybody knows we're all Africans.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. The other a person that had a comment was Lulu in the back, and then we're gonna try to move it along a little bit.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to say that before, Africa was known as south of the Sahara Desert. The Egyptians, the Moroccans, the Tunisians, all those people did not want to be identified with Black Africa.
Well, you and I have discussed that at length, and you're from Tanzania. There's a lot of back and forth as to what the political and historical definition of it is. And ultimately, what some of you have been referring to is, if we're going to move forward as a world, these are points of reference, not stopping points, but ways for us to unify. Ways for us to unify and move forward in peace.
Right.
Thank you, Lulu. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so I guess we can really get started. You've touched on some of Italy's attempted colonization of Ethiopia and the history of Italian aggression. So, you know, why don't you go into that overview?
Okay, well, thank you. You know, what's great about these questions is, as I was answering them, we got into the content of what we were talking about quite a bit. And if we could hold off on more questions until later, believe me, I'm going to be having at least one bagel, so you'll catch me. I try to have at least one. Save one for me.
Right.
Cinnamon raisin is my favorite. The Italians in the 1890s came into the region that we now know as Ethiopia. At the time, it was referred commonly as Abyssinia. And part of what they did was they arbitrarily cut off a sliver of the land bordering the Red Sea, and they renamed it a Latin term, which we now know as Eritrea. Completely arbitrary, out of the blue. Not something where they talked to the people and said, what would you like to be called? Or tell me a little about your history. Let's come up with a no, this was colonial mentality. Now, south of there was the effort to take over and dominate the rest of Abyssinia, which was Ethiopia. As the Italian colonists came in, not under Mussolini, but under an emperor of Italian origin, the emperor of Ethiopian origin confronted them in one of the most studied and storied military battles of world history, called the Battle of Adwa. So in 1896, the Italians were confronted there and defeated. There's even an album by the artist Bob Marlon in which the painting depicting this battle is on the back of the album. And the reason for that is many people saw it as a way to begin the process of throwing the European colonists out of Africa, which culminated really in the 60s and 70s. And the last to go, essentially, was apartheid Africa in 1994. That was the last remnant of the European colonization of the 1890s. So essentially, this began, for Italy, it was repelled for the majority of Ethiopia. Then, by the time the 20s came around and the world economic depression gripped the world, including here in the 30s, the dictatorships in Europe rose. The fascist dictatorships of Hitler and Mussolini rose. And one of the things that Mussolini did was he preyed on people's fears and sense of inferiority, being poor, being without a national identity, being in an identity crisis, and saying, let us revenge or avenge the Battle of Adwa. So by 1935, he was taking a desperately poor, economically ruined nation and convincing them to go to war. And I think it was here, no, it was at another event, someone said, that's consumer fraud. If you don't tell me what the price tag is until I bought the product, that's consumer fraud. And Mussolini was a master at it. Selling, even to my own family, a dream that had no reality to it. You can go there, we will give you land, opportunities, wealth, for as long as you like, and no strings attached. It's kind of like, Pinocchio. And so my grandfather was one of the victims. He went there. He spent 4 years enslaving, essentially. Excuse me, I have to talk about my grandfather in this manner. I love him. And God rest his soul, and one of the greatest people you could ever meet, but convinced under those conditions to create a colonial slave-like atmosphere. As people colonized and militarized Ethiopia, Mussolini became more popular. Some of you can remember the invasion of Grenada, 1983. Thank you. Sometimes I'm thinking, am I the only one who remembers these dates? But Marlon's right there with me. People in this country went completely berserk. And what did we do? We took over a beach in the Caribbean. I looked around and I was saying, well, what about nuclear weapons? Last week, no. Ronald Reagan liberated those medical students, and you saw them kiss the ground. I'm thinking to myself, have we gone back to the 30s? Have we now, we forgot our senses. Of course the United States could take over a Caribbean island, we know that, but how can you take any pride in that, knowing that we would obliterate, the opposition in a few minutes' time? So the same mentality took root, but in a more insidious and dangerous way, in the sense that Mussolini was an ally of Hitler and, obviously the most destructive force in the 20th century in Europe, and would have, if the world had acted, and I know your questions are going to get into that more, if we had acted to stop Mussolini when Emperor Selassie requested it of the world, we may have avoided some of the tragedy, not only in Africa and Europe, but also in Asia at the time.
I want to sort of try to couple a couple of these questions together. Give us a quick history of the Axum obelisk and of Axum, and then sort of go from there and explain Mussolini's position on taking the obelisk and the importance, because the obelisk is like pretty much a real centerpiece of the attempt of Italy to colonize Ethiopia and what it meant at the time, and then the sentiment moving forward to bringing the obelisk back. So sort of touch on those things for a second.
Thank you. And if you could, I'm going to answer it.
Yeah.
I just need to get a glass of water.
While he gets that, let me just tell you that a little about Nick started. He started coming to meetings in July of 09. He became a member of the society in September of 09. I met Nick at my platform speech during the
I feel like I'm on the last mile of the marathon.
and we've corresponded since. He's the author of the return of the Axum obelisk. So he's a wealth of knowledge about this situation that we're discussing here, right?
Yes,
Okay, so-
I'm hydrated. Thank you. The Axum obelisk sounds very obscure, and one of the things that I brought in today is a copy of a vanity book published that I published online. You could do this on blurb.com if you have a hobby. This is my hobby. On the cover is a photo of this 4th century work of genius from the Ethiopians. It's a monument that was carved of solid granite. And for the Ethiopians, it symbolizes their culture even deeper, in a deeper sense than the Statue of Liberty does to the United States. Because it has a historical rootedness that goes back centuries. So the question became, when Mussolini invaded Ethiopia, how was he going to humiliate the Ethiopians and show the Italians not only that he conquered it, but I have some physical proof of it. And in the tradition of typical wartime aggression, he looted. And the thing he looted was the most important symbol of their dignity and respect as a civilization, which was the Axum obelisk. So this was a 160-ton piece taken by ship to Rome and erected at the foot of the Circus Maximus in Rome, in front of his African headquarters, Mussolini's African headquarters, on the 15th anniversary of his year in power. And the reason I say that is because he considered it one of the tangible centerpieces of his dictatorship. So, I'm not sure if he asked me the question yet, but joyfully and in a life-changing way, I became part of a committee that helped return the obelisk to Ethiopia. So by 2005, the looted obelisk from 1937 was physically back in Ethiopia, and now, thanks to UNESCO and the UN and the world community, it is re-erected in its original spot in Ethiopia, and it is really a slap in the face to aggression and war and dictatorship. And considering the context in which it was taken, we took great pride in bringing it back to Ethiopia.
Well, speak to that for a second. Like, explain the sentiment of having the obelisk in Italy. How did Italian nationals and Italian citizens view having the obelisk? And when the cry came out to return it to Ethiopia, speak to us about that process.
Well, okay. This is very important because what a lot of people forgot, including Ethiopians that I spoke to here and abroad, is that the return was only a symbol. And in fact, the taking of it was only a symbol. It meant nothing unless we did what? Gave it meaning. So the meaning that people gave it when it was returned was one of reconciliation and peace. Therefore, people couldn't logically say, okay, why would you give a country that's not doing so well economically or in terms of human rights a piece of stone? Why not? Where is the development money? Where is the grain? Where is the... Those things come with a big package of mutual respect for cultural roots, including the Axum obelisk, which again is just a symbol. It's a symbol of the history and dignity of the Ethiopian people, but when it was taken, it was a symbol of a disrespect for that and of aggression. Getting back to what you're saying, many Italian Americans here in the United States were very, how do I put it? They weren't fully aware of what was happening. There were some newspaper articles in the Italian press, and what I was waiting for, being a person who was writing and commenting on this, I was waiting for that backlash, and I was ready for it in many ways, because whether it would come in the form of a threat, which never happened, or it would just come in the form of some Tea Party type in an Italian setting saying something ridiculous, it essentially never happened. What did occur was, as it became sunk into reality that this was actually going to be returned to Ethiopia, there were some desperate attempts at demonstrations by right-wing fascist sympathizers in 2003 and 2004. Now, getting back to the principles of ethical society, of course, of Jefferson, I welcome that, I don't welcome what they're saying, but it's like getting the rats out of the sewer. It's getting these people to come out and surface and say these racist things, these backward things. Then we can say, okay, look, there's only a dozen right there. So we need to talk about their hatred, and it becomes a point of discussion about their hatred and how to overcome it. Now, what I ended up doing was, with blog technology, is making some comments over the internet. Bless you. Thank you. Making some comments over the internet, and later finding out, indirectly, that the person who juxtaposed their position was an archduke who had sympathized with the fascists under Mussolini. If you can imagine someone like Dick Cheney sitting at home, and some, high school social studies teacher, me being, makes a comment about his policy, and he's just, you can imagine him infuriated. No one's coming to my defense. I have to type this in. So I imagine this archduke just getting infuriated. Where are my people? And that is one of the success stories, if you will, of returning it. That we called them on it. We said, okay, you have these sympathies, what are you going to do? And let's see what you have to say. And it fizzled. And the UNESCO and both nations saw it as an opportunity to move forward, not just in terms of putting that past behind them, but in mutual development, not just for Ethiopia's sake, but for Europe and Italy's sake. The reasons for going into Ethiopia as a colonial power still exist today in terms of the real needs of Italy to get minerals, have strategic protection in the area. So if we eliminate the colonial mentality and go in with a mentality of partnership, then the Ethiopian people may, by their own free choosing, trade in the minerals that they have, the stonework, and allow military involvement or diplomatic involvement in their nation. Otherwise, all the colonial mentality is, how do you say, the colonial mentality has overwhelmed the true needs of both nations.
Right.
I don't know if I've lost you on that last point.
This whole speech and platform today is titled "Got Peace," and one of the things in talking with you that we discussed was how when you have aggressions and wars, you hardly ever get to actively witness the healing process of those things. How do you come back together? How is retribution and reconciliation? Do you go about that? And if so, how? And so, I think the return of the obelisk sort of signifies a reach, olive branch, so to speak, of reconciliation. But, I want you to sort of speak about that reconciliation process. I mean, you and I spoke about the Graziani massacre, which is something that I thought we would get to here, and we sort of jumped all around, but sort of explain that atrocity, because you hear of atrocities all the time, and those are the ways to sensationalize war on one side or the other, but this is an atrocity that I've never heard. I didn't hear about it until you told me.
This is an excellent point, and maybe the point that we could wrap up with.
Absolutely.
Because all of us are aware of the Rwanda massacre. Occurred essentially in the middle of the 90s. But a few of us keep a daily journal, if you will, or make an attempt to see what's going on in Rwanda today. How are the Tutsis and the Hutus getting along? And how significant that is in light of what happened. The reason we entitled it "God Peace" is we spend so much time as a world focusing on the bloodshed. Why not, when people are getting along, we celebrate it and we recognize it? In a few weeks, down Eastern Parkway, dozens of nations in the Caribbean will celebrate routinely their common peace, yet their pride in their individual nations. Right here in the middle of New York City, the largest Caribbean Day celebration in the world.
In Brooklyn.
In Brooklyn.
Absolutely.
Marlon has to plug Brooklyn. It's okay. And Joe, and it's okay. I'll let you slide on that one. You're now part of the city, aren't you? Okay. So, with Italy, one of the things that occurred that most people who study the atrocities of World War II, including the Holocaust of millions of people both in Europe, Asia, and Africa, is they don't understand that Ethiopians were not only victims of genocide, mustard gas in World War II, bombing of Red Cross shelters and facilities in World War II, total violations of the Geneva Accord. But at one point there was a 3-day massacre of civilians only, essentially a pogrom of Ethiopians by Italians in the capital. And this is called the Graziani Massacre, because of the attempt by Ethiopians to liberate themselves by killing the the Italian ruler in Ethiopia named Graziani, Rodolfo Graziani. The failed attempt led to Mussolini ordering a 72-hour massacre of any civilians that could get a hold of, and they purposefully went into a monastery, dragged 449 monks out of a Christian monastery and slaughtered them in revenge for an attempted assassination. Now this massacre of 30,000 people over 3 days' time and probably is news to most of you. And that is one of the points of having today's discussion, that it shouldn't be. This should be as knowledgeable, and people should be studying it further as we do all the other atrocities in order to celebrate how far we've come. How could it be that this happened in the 30s, and then when I went to Ethiopia in 1996 and told everyone my heritage, I was treated like a long-lost cousin? What does that say about the Ethiopians? And now, obviously, we have a history of cooperation between the two countries, and yet, you won't see this on CNN, so don't check. And you definitely won't see it on Fox News, because we've become, the reason we sit here every Sunday is we're tired of war selling products, and hatred and aggression and bigotry selling, and we have to depend on our livelihood because this is what we're promoting. Instead of, hey, we have a story from Vietnam. Guess what? The Vietnamese people ended their war, and any American that goes there is treated like a long-lost cousin. This is a story to me. That's what I look for. So thanks for that question and the opportunity. And I also want to thank you very much, Marlon, for taking time out today to come in. Marlon and I worked on this quite a bit, and if any of you missed Marlon's presentation in January on the anniversary of Dr. King's birthday, get on the website for Ethical Culture, watch it, because there's insight there that reflects on what we talked about today, and also some of the things that most mainstream media will not want you to know about Martin Luther King. That in fact, as he was approaching his last days, he sounded a lot like us on a Sunday. Forget the religious part of things, not forget it, but let's get to the common humanity that we have and solve the issues of poverty, war, injustice. And this was his final months on earth. So thank you, Marlon, for making that presentation and connecting it today with us.
I hope you guys have had some information. I hope you guys have heard new things, things that may have inspired you to check and research further. Nick is great guy. Thank you for including me in this. I think maybe a couple of questions before we get out of here. Ken has a question.
Microphone. Ken, hold on. I can
Hold
hear
on
you,
1 second.
but some people can't.
Oh, I'm interested in this last little blurt down here. Home of the first organization of African Unity, now called the African Union.
Yes.
Do you know when that happened or something about it?
Okay, the Organization of African Unity began in the late 50s, early 60s by the Emperor Haile Selassie. Now, why would all the African people at the time put their faith and trust in this man? Because Ethiopia was still the symbol of independence. Now, in the 60s, this organization took root in the capital of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa. It evolved into the year 2000 into the African Union, similar in name to the European Union, and intended to be kind of a equal in terms of world conversation, diplomatic world conversation. It now has many main offices in South Africa, because as much as Haile Selassie symbolized freedom for Africa in the 20th century, South Africa, especially after Mandela's release, symbolized it in the 21st century. and still does.
Our president, Andrew Miller.
Could you describe the obelisk?
Hold on, Andrea. Anne's coming to you.
Describe the obelisk.
Yes, I'd love to, and what I'm hoping to do is share some time with you individually. I have 3 or 4 copies of my book here. On the cover, you can see a photo of it. It essentially, to simplify it, is a 4th century design of a skyscraper. Now, the skyscrapers in this continent and in the world were not actually built until the 1800s. But these designers, in creating this tombstone for kings, thought of a skyscraper image, that you would have a door and windows so that when a person passes away, they would actually rise toward their final resting place. Now, the way it ties into ethical, being the president of ethical culture, Andra, I could say you may appreciate this more than most, that it unifies Ethiopia in a pre-Christian, pre-Islamic era. When these things were built, Christianity had not arrived yet in Ethiopia, and Islam had not arrived. And the impact, it was, I guess some people would call it a pagan philosophy, but it's actually more accurately called a traditional religion. And the kings were buried there, this was their tombstone. This particular Axum obelisk, there are dozens of them in the cemetery, the Royal Cemetery. But this particular one weighed 160 tons, was 72 feet high, and when it was finally flown back to Ethiopia, it broke a world record for being the heaviest object to be flown on a cargo plane in world history. I don't know if I got to any of your... good description?
May I just add to that, if I might?
Wait for the microphone, and I think this gentleman here has been waiting quite a while, right after Dr. Thomas.
The significance for the Ethiopians, as I have learned, is a spiritual, whereas Nicola has stated, when someone passes or makes this transition, as we say in African, you make your transition, you want to rise to heaven. This obelisk is a spiritual
Conduit? Conduit, is that a good word?
Yes, and what we have given this obelisk in the Western world is the feeling of a phallic symbol. That's what I've heard oftentimes about even what you see, the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., that it's a phallic symbol, which again takes away from the spirituality of our ancient, who we have descended from, ancient Africans, their spirituality. This is, as we said, 4th century, it's before Christianity, Islam, and their beliefs may, to many of us, feel as though it's paganist, but it's a spirituality of going back to heaven, which is what Africans, the ancient Africans, were all about.
Thank you. I think we got one more question. This gentleman right here was waiting for a moment.
Good morning. My wife and I were vacationing in Israel in 1985. At that time, 3,000 Ethiopians arrived in Israel. They were considered to be the last of the 13th tribe of Israel. And I thought that that might be relevant to...
It is very relevant, and I'm going to try to wrap up with this comment, because I know people are getting a little hungry, and those bagels are good. I'm one of them. The Ethiopian Jews are one of the most unknown groups in the world, period. Most Jews don't know they're Ethiopian Jews. Most Jews don't realize, and most people don't realize, that Jews practice today in Ethiopia going back to the time of Moses. And I worked on a project to create a curriculum on this group of people. And there are several theories as to why they're there in Ethiopia. But the things we do know is, one, there was several eras of Jewish kingdom in Ethiopia. Queen Nicola, who traveled to Israel as one of the connections back to Israel after a time period of Judaism in Ethiopia. And the notion that many people kind of have in the back of their heads, wait a second, that's the most odd thing. Ethiopian Jews? No. The odd thing is the reverse, because in other words, why would people scratch their head if the people who originated in Egypt moved a few miles south to Ethiopia, but they're not scratching their heads when people are in other parts of the world? So getting past that helps save lives, because what occurred in many different eras, including under communism in 1985, was these people were targeted because of their adherence to their faith, and they wouldn't just succumb to the communist dictatorship. So they were victimized, and they were exiled eventually to Israel. I think we're going to have to take questions in the back.
Yeah.
Sai, thank you.
One point, there's strong evidence that Moses' wife was Ethiopian.
This could be. Again, I thank you so much for coming. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you for having us.